History fans, welcome to the Spots of Love podcast. I'm glad you're here today. Our episode today, we have another Barney fan. We have Sean, who is joining us today, and I'm so excited to talk to him and hear his story. Sean, how are you? Welcome to the podcast.
I'm very well, thank you. From sunny London across the pond, so that's nice to be chatting to somebody from America.
Yeah, absolutely. I was just going to ask, where exactly are you from over there? So London is the place. Yeah, it is really cool to talk to people outside of the U.S. We've only talked to one fan so far who didn't live in the U.S., so it's always fun to talk to other people from around the world.
I was going to be the first one there.
Yeah, no, you're only the second though, and so that's still a great spot to have for us. The way we start our podcast all the time is with the same question. Just what was your introduction to Barney, or your earliest memory of Barney, and what kind of drew you into this show and this character?
Oh, right. Okay. Let me try and think. Because I was born a year after Barney and Friends would have premiered in America. So I was born in 93.
Yep.
So I was 30 last year. So over here, Barney would have premiered a couple of years after it did in America. So around 94, because we have quite a lap. And at the time, there was quite a lot of hype over this American character who had done very well in the States.
Mm-hmm.
And the big morning network that we have over here, which was GMTV, which I guess is a bit like Good Morning America. They were looking to up their viewing figures because, around that time, the other networks were doing very well in competition.
Mm-hmm.
And they wanted a character who was quite well established to come and be the mascot of their channel. And they thought that this character, Barney, would do very well. To which he kind of did, and the ailing figures kind of went up because they introduced it. But that's the earliest time we had him over here. But for me, I think I always have memories of me and my auntie watching Barney when I was very young, because she literally had stackfuls of videotapes. I mean, if it wasn't for the videotapes, I probably wouldn't have had a chance to really watch him, because they didn't really know where to place him over here in terms of what network to put him on. So, I had all the videotapes. I would constantly watch them over and over again. Really, that's the earliest memory for me, is just watching him on video.
That's
having
awesome.
to rewind it back constantly all the time.
Yeah, that seems to be kind of like the common thing. I told you before we started, like, it's fun talking to fans because a lot of us have the same kind of experience, and talking to a lot of fans, that's always a common thing. Like, we just had tapes and we had we constantly just rewinded it and restarted it over and over again. So yeah, that's pretty cool. It's interesting because we're the same age, because I was also born in 93. So Barney was kind of in our house because of season 1 through my older brother, who was a year older than me. And then I'm the one who kept it in our family and, through each other generation. With it starting there in the UK a couple years after it started here, do you recall, or do you know, did it start with like the early season 1 and 2, or did it start from where they were currently at that time?
I remember there was a channel that we had on satellite and cable that would air the first season and the second season much later down the line, before they aired the season after that. So I grew up with all of the seasons, really, but not in sync with how they aired in America. So it must have been about 97 or something like that when I really started to get into Barney. Because I was at that age where, I mean, he was premiering, primarily for the first time here. And yeah, they would just constantly repeat it. But it got to the point, I guess, in the early 2000s where they just couldn't market him very well over here due to a certain company that took it over. They didn't really do very well with him. And they had a track record of taking kids programs and not doing too good with them. But I think to your question, yeah, it was the early 90s, and I do remember season 1 and 2. Way after. I mean, I had a couple of Backyard Gang videos. I remember the Christmas one, waiting for Santa. Yeah, I remember that, but I remember being quite scared of how Barney looked back then, because I was so used to seeing Barney from Barney and Friends and looking very different. So I wasn't the biggest fan of Barney's deep voice then, or how Bob originally did him. So I remember not being too, I don't know, not really, taking to the original series.
Yeah.
Sadly.
Sure.
Points have changed now, so.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's interesting because I didn't know anything of the Backyard Gang either until I was maybe a preteen, and I found a video at like a thrift shop, bought it for really cheap and was like, what in the world is this thing? So I wasn't exposed to it as a young kid, but you hear a lot of stories of kids who were Barney fans who were exposed to it as a young kid. It would freak them out. I fortunately wasn't exposed to it that young, so I didn't have that kind of thing. It's weird though, because I have a 3-year-old, and right now she's in a phase where she loves Backyard Gang. Like she calls it the big one, and I'm like Onyx, they're all big, but like she only prefers the Blue Dog, as they call it, those very early tapes. So it's really interesting that's kind of like her niche right now. And yeah, the deep voice for him was so different, and it's funny to think because if you've ever been on Bob West's lives that he do and things, he said when he auditioned for that video, for initially, he used the voice that Barney eventually became on the PBS series. So that would have been kind of jarring to hear that kind of voice come from that look of the character at that time as well.
Yeah.
Do you, being exposed to the Backyard Gang in the early seasons, and then what came after that, do you have a specific time or specific season that you really enjoy over the others?
Gosh, that's interesting. I liked it with the transition from the school to when they went to live in the treehouse. I liked that because it was at a time over here where we were seeing it for the first time. So it was new. It was almost like, so Barney's evolved. It's new. It was there. Whereas before I was probably a bit too old in terms of catching up with the original series. So it wasn't like, this is fresh and new. I was just seeing repeats of that. Whereas the later series, it was like, okay, now we get to see new episodes of Barney premiere here, and I get to see it for the first time. So it's always lovely to see that. Otherwise, it's just, as we said before, the videotapes. But I remember the later episodes, probably 96, 97, when they sort of changed, and the kids changed as well. So it always sticks in my mind. Then they had the 2 squirrel characters, which I couldn't understand why they got rid of them in the end. But they were very good. And I just remember loving that era of Barney particularly.
I agree with you. Scooter and Miss Etta, and even Booker T later on, the bookworm character, those puppet characters were so great of an addition for those 3 years they were there. And it's strange that when they later moved it, when Hit took over and moved it to the park, that is where you would even be more to see a squirrel or a bird kind of character come out.
Yeah, you think so.
you would think that they would have kept it. I just talked to someone about this the other day. There's obviously here in the US, I don't know if it's like this there in London with you all, but
Mm-hmm.
there's people our age are more prone to the classic era, the treehouse era, or what came before, and they really kind of dislike most of the park era kind of stuff. And it's just such an interesting thing, because what I was explaining to them is, when you think about it, the park era stuff that came was technically like a refresh or a reboot of Barney and Friends. Like, it wasn't the same Barney
Yeah.
that it was then. So I can see why some elements changed, but there's some certain things that worked so well that they could have continued on with the
Mm-hmm.
success that was definitely a disservice, I think, to the show to have
Yeah.
gotten rid of
Yeah.
them.
I mean, it's interesting you say that, because I think, sadly, Barney fizzled out over here when they had that interval. They had a sort of break for a couple of years, and then
Uh,
they decided that, really, rather than continuing, they would kind of revamp it. And they kind of did, because not that the concept changed, and I guess they used the same, songs, and just updated the music and whatever. But it was strange, because they couldn't place Barney over here then. I think he had done his job in the 90s for us kids over here, and then
mhm.
by that time it was almost like, well, yeah, he's still going strong in America, but they were producing DVDs over here continuously. But I just think, because it kind of changed hands as well with another company that, as I
Yeah,
said before, they have a track record of not, doing justice to kids TV, in
mhm.
my opinion. And I've spoken to lots of people that worked on various shows
Yeah,
that were produced by that company, that will say the same thing.
mhm.
Basically, what they want to do is, they want to take these programs and kind of modernize them, which I get,
Mhm.
because it's almost like we can say, well, we're of a generation where we've watched it and we've still got it, and nobody's taking that away from us, because we can still see it on YouTube and
For
whatever.
sure.
But we've got to make way for the new generation, and everything has to evolve. So it's not really for us to say whether we like it or not. It's down to our kids. My
Yeah,
little one watches the later episodes of Barney, and doesn't think any different to the original episodes. So
for sure.
it all depends really on preference. But yeah, I just think it was taken into the wrong hands, if I'm being honest with you.
Oh yeah.
And they tried to remodernize it, and it just didn't have that same feel
Mhm.
that the original episodes had.
No, you're absolutely right on a few parts. From the kid perspective, when they started to change it, obviously, by the time they went to the park seasons 2002 and 3, we're
Mm-hmm.
10, 11 years old. We're starting to grow out of it for most of us. But kids today who watch the later hit stuff, who also watch, like my daughter and your kid who watches
Yeah.
the earlier stuff, my daughter loves Backyard Gang. When they look at, for my daughter, when she looks at the new iteration for the Barney's World thing, it's still Barney to her. So they're in this world where all these different versions of Barney are still the same to them.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what matters most, is that they're creating it for those kids of that era that they were in. Absolutely.
Yeah.
But I think you are also absolutely correct with just the way that the company handled the show was the complete wrong. The first two seasons, season 7 and 8, are up there, in my opinion, with the early seasons of Barney. They had Stephen White as the head writer, so for the first time, both seasons, each episodes felt more cohesive and together, because he oversaw each episode, so it flowed more smoothly than where you just didn't have a head writer and people were just submitting scripts and it was just being done.
Yeah.
But starting with season 9 and then later on, they started to change things because of the UK. They were looking for, we want to see less American kids on the screen. We want to see more of the dinos. We want to see shorter episodes because kids' attention spans can't last for 30, So they started doing all these things that mess up their entire formula. And unfortunately, that's what happens also when you bring in a corporation. Every time a new person takes over a product, the first thing is, what do we change? Even if
Yeah, of
nothing needs
course.
to be changed, they change it. And then, they keep doing that. And yeah, that's where we started. We literally, I mean, never grew out of Barney. I watched it all the way to the end, but
Yeah.
I watched as it died. I was part of it growing and getting huge, and then I also watched as they, by each episode and video they released, they slowly killed it,
Mm-hmm.
which is very unfortunate. And but that I'm 100% with you agreeing that they just handled it very poorly.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, it's strange because there's lots of over here. There's lots of programs that
mm,
are owned by that company that
yeah.
have slowly decided what they want to do is, because animation is easier to dub in any language you want, and we have a program called Peppa Pig over here, which you
Oh yeah.
may be aware of. He's been about for years, and he can be dubbed in any language you want and shown all around the world because it's just easier that way. To
Mhm.
have a production as big as that, and to actually have presenters like they have on Sesame Street, or we had a show called Play School over here,
Oh
which
yeah.
is very similar, and to have actual people in actual studios singing, dancing, it was really, really difficult. I've spoken to people that would say it's the hardest thing they've ever had to do. When you've
Mhm.
got 20 minutes to record, 40 minutes to record a half an hour show, and you've got to sing and dance at the same time, make things, you had very little time to actually mess up.
Yeah.
And it was very authentic that way. But it almost felt like it was almost like a conveyor belt where things were just going the way the company wanted them to go.
Mhm.
And some people were very fortunate with various programs that hit actually produced, that they were able to take back control of that and say, right, okay, well, let's buy the rights to this and we will, figure it out our way. But unfortunately, even up until today, I don't think anybody's been able to get a grip on how they can get Barney back to the way it was.
Yeah. Well, and I think you're right, but I also think, unfortunately, it, there we'll never see Barney the way it was like ever again.
Right.
Like I think they oh man, the formula was so set up for it to be a show that probably could have lasted as long as Sesame Street has been lasting, or
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Rogers lasted, or I think Play School lasted for a good while, didn't it? Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, it had the formula, the way Cheryl Leach and those guys, the way
Mm-hmm.
um, Lions Group that eventually became Lyric Studios handled it. It was set up for the success, and just selling it out to a company like that, where they clearly, that was their biggest brand, I would say, when they took that in, and they just let it go to the wayside. Now, once that died out, now it's been 15 years before they've even tried to do something that's actually successful with the show, because they've tried over the past few years to do things, and it just, from what I hear, nothing was working.
Right.
And so they, it was scrapped, and now we're here with this animated version that's going to be vastly different, if for nothing else, just because it's animation. um,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that's where we're going to find our disappointment as adults who grew up with the show, because it's not at all going to be what Barney was. And with so much time in
Mm-hmm.
between, they're obviously going to make it modern for 2024 version of what Barney would have
Mm-hmm.
probably evolved to. And with
Yeah.
so much time in between, it's going to be very strange to see a character that they're calling Barney look so different, and most likely be so different than what he ever was before, what we were ever used
Yeah.
to.
No, I totally agree with you. But I do think also that in order for something to stay relevant and fresh, as an audience, you kind of have to forget about it first. It's almost like
Oh,
when they say, Oh, I would much rather be in a program where someone says, "Oh, that program, I enjoyed that program," rather than people say, "Oh, that program, is that still on?" So it's almost like you need to have that break for people to go, "Actually, I remember that show. Is it anywhere near as good as I remember it?" So and also, people want to move on and do other things, see different things. We're constantly evolving. I think, certain characters have always been there. And I think, Barney is one of those characters that whatever the character itself has always been there. He's been on one level. And that's very rare for a character, because, as you said, you mentioned various different shows there and Play School and all that sort of stuff. We have a short tendency over here to produce something and then want to kind of change it and evolve what we've done. So I think you in America produce children's programming a lot better nowadays than we do here. I mean, sadly, the demise of kids' TV over here has completely gone. For preschool children, there is literally nothing. So it's almost like in Canada, it's non-existent. Until recently, a friend of mine told me that he was one of the puppet makers on a Canadian program for children, and it was the very first preschool show that Canada had ever produced, and I was shocked.
Wow!
And I thought, wow, they're just non-existent there. So I feel very fortunate that in my generation, everybody says their generation was the best, but I mean, my generation, we had good television shows that were produced really well, and people took time and they had the budget to do it. Nowadays, there just isn't the budget, really.
Yeah, for sure. I agree with everything that you said. The one thing that you touched on that I agree with too is Barney. You said there's characters that have just always been there, and I think that speaks to the power that character of Barney had or created, because you're very right. Even with it not creating any new content for however many years it's been, that character has always still been in the conversation in some form, and that's something that is rare and something hard to have be done without a show that airs for however many years, for a long time, and then obviously it's always in the conversation. But for a show to go away for 14 plus years, and then throughout that entire time it still has a place in everybody's conversation, whether it's about their childhood or whatever it is, that is a remarkable thing to have. It's unfortunate that you say there in London or the UK that there's not a market, or there's nothing for preschool age kids. I do my own children's show, inspired because of Barney here in the US, and a friend of mine actually lives there in London as well, who helped edit some of my things, and he always told me I should move over there and create the show because it's just an open lane. There's no one doing it at all for preschool kids. No. And it's so unfortunate because that's the age that you want to reach, so they can get all the skills they need, like Barney and those shows gave us, for them to be successful and to grow. And if you're not creating anything healthy for them to consume while they're already on these tablets and sites anyway, you're kind of doing a disservice to the youth, I think.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Yeah, it's a different world now, and times have moved on. And also you've got, over here you've probably got about 38 children's channels that are mainly full of cartoons and that sort of stuff. So everybody's got choice now, whether it's YouTube or whether it is, online. So kids have a lot more choice. When I was growing up, and the same for you, if you missed a program, you had to record it on your VHS. It was different world. And you had to go out. We've missed the point of view where I remember growing up in school, we would go into the playground and this new show would be on and everybody would be talking about it because everybody would be watching it at the same time. You wouldn't have, there's no choice there. Whereas now I could watch a program, on catch up that somebody's watched, weeks later. So there's no real conversation behind it. So it is really true. And going back to the point of Barney always being there are certain characters that only really become novelty now because they only ever really appear on comedy shows, or if they're appearing as guests on various programs. It's like if you don't appear on a talk show or you're only ever popping up every now and again, you kind of fizzle out. And a lot of characters have done that. But somebody like Bob, it must be good for him to be able to walk down the street and nobody could really, unless you knew him very well, would batter an eyelid unless he opened his mouth and you go, "Oh, Barney." So that's quite nice for him. But then on the other side, there are some people that would say, well, actually, I've done the voice. I'd quite like to be recognized now. So
yes, absolutely. Yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting because you see that with Barney too. There's certain people, like Bob. He'll do his, his lives. He'll do his conventions. But aside from that, unless you knew of him, if you knew of him, you wouldn't know what he did. But there's other people who they put off like they don't want to be associated with the show anymore, but they parade around in branded things all the time, so they have that attention. So yeah, it's a very interesting dynamic that happens there too, where the way that certain people, I think. I don't know what it's like to be a celebrity yet. I'm slowly growing here in my own town from the show and things like that. So people are noticing me, but I much like it when people don't know who I am more than always, people noticing me. So I for someone like Bob, it has to be nice to, you're just, when people see you, if they know who you are, that's great. But a lot of times you can still go and get food or do things that you're just a normal person, which is what a lot of people in the industry probably hope to always have, and not a lot of people can do that especially if they're really known.
I call them the silent heroes, but they hold a lot of, by doing that you can hold a lot of humility as well in what you do. So
for sure,
you don't become overly big-headed in that way. It's just nice.
And I think that's why someone like Bob is so loved by the fans, is because even though he puts himself out there a little more than he ever has before, on his lives or doing these cons, that's really he does that because he genuinely loves the characters he did, not just Barney, because he did the characters for Chuck E. Cheese, so it's for all of that stuff. He genuinely enjoyed that stuff, and I think he genuinely enjoys talking and interacting with the fans. And that's just what helps him to go. Like all the extra attention and viral moments and things is not his interest, it seems. And I think that's what draws so many more people to him and love him even more than just from doing those characters, because of who he is just as a human being, and the way that, he carries himself with the genuine love for those moments. And then other times he's just, a normal guy who's doing what he loves to do.
Absolutely, that's the way to be.
Absolutely, man. We talked a little bit about this new version of Barney that's coming out, and you said that you have a kid, right?
Yeah.
Are they in that age group that this new Barney would be fit for?
Yes. Yeah, he's 3 now, so he just turned 3 this year.
Awesome. Yeah, so the same age as my daughter. What? Obviously, we've said it before that that show is not for us, but I think for all fans, we want to be able to enjoy it when it comes out, just because of whether it's nostalgia or the love of the character. What are your thoughts when you first saw that that's happening, and now that it's supposed to be here just in a few months? What are your thoughts about this new version? What do you hope to see, or is there anything that's holding you back from what could be coming?
Well, I wasn't surprised that they were going to change it and make it a kind of CGI thing. That didn't surprise me at all, because as I said before, everything is animation now, and that's what really saddens me, that we
Yeah.
don't have actual people presenting, like I said. So that's the one thing that I am a bit weary of. I'm pleased that they are, giving a nod to the original Barney, and of course, Corey Durham does the original voice now, which is amazing. I mean, I
Mhm.
couldn't tell the difference between him and Bob. It was like Bob's in the same room. So he's so talented at what he does, and I think it's lovely that they're able to do that. But they've done that with probably nearly every show that there was. That it's
Yeah.
now it's animation. I've been introducing my little one to an Australian show called The Bananas in Pajamas,
Oh, I
and
love that
I
show.
show him the original episodes where they're actually in costumes. It's
Yeah.
live action. And I had the same thought when that came out, and they made it into a kind of animated series, and I smiled when it came out because I thought, oh, that's nice, because I remember that.
Uh-huh.
It's like, oh, I like that. It's like they're still trying to keep the memory alive. So it's lovely in any form to see the character evolve, as I said. So
Yeah.
for me personally, it's just nice that he's still there.
Hmm.
I'd rather have something than nothing. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah. And a lot of things, especially for fans, we've been saying for years since Barney went off the air or was canceled in 2009,
Mm-hmm.
um,
God, it was
is
that long ago.
it's crazy that it's been that long.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think they were canceled before that because the season 13 aired in 2009, but they would have filmed it in 2008. So
Right.
it's been even longer. But one thing that we've always said as fans is, man, if we ever needed Barney before, it's during the time now.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what I'm excited for, is that for the kids' perspective, they get to have their version of Barney, like we had ours.
Yeah.
Um, but also, if the messages stay true to the character of love and acceptance and those things, we absolutely need more shows for children that push those messages more now
Of
than ever, because
course.
we don't have those. It can be successful, I think, because if you look back, like you said, Bananas in Pajamas definitely was live action and went to animation.
Mm-hmm.
We had a show here. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, called Zaboomafoo. Um,
Right.
and it wasn't a continuation of that show, but they did a spinoff called Wildcrats, and that's all animation. You have Daniel Tiger now, which is an animated reboot or animated spinoff of Mr. Rogers. And they stay true kind of to who those characters were or had always been. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that's the message. If Mattel takes anything from it as they begin, because they're not including anyone that is still alive that dealt with the show, if they just
Right.
at least keep the character true to the core, even in animation form, it could still be a very successful show.
Yeah,
Um,
I think it will be. I mean,
yeah,
the character itself just stands alone. So I think
yeah,
whatever you do with the character, I think it's going to some interest with a lot of people. So
for sure. And it's still a dinosaur, and for some
yeah.
reason, the love of dinosaurs has just been a generational thing for every generation of kids. So um,
Mm-hmm.
even if nothing else, the dinosaur aspect also just draws children into it.
Yeah. Yeah. Very
Um,
true.
talking so as you were growing up with Barney, did Barney did these huge live tours and things like that. Did
Mm-hmm.
Barney ever come there to London and do live shows? Did you ever get a chance to see the character live in any form?
No, that was one thing I didn't get to see. Um, that wasn't as prominent over here.
Yeah.
I don't actually know whether I should imagine he did. Well, I know that he toured over here when they were. I mean, they were doing strands, as I mentioned earlier, for GMTV when they were trying to get this new character onto British TV. So he came over here to do some promo work,
Yeah.
working with some British presenters. And what they would do is, I think they would do live productions with various other characters all together.
Oh, okay.
So he would be involved with lots of other characters. But the theatre for me growing up was a magical place. I loved it because when you get to see, that character from your TV screen on stage, there's nothing. If it's the real deal, if it's the real person, there's nothing better than that. But sadly, I didn't get to see Barney live. I would have loved to. I saw every other show imaginable, but just not Barney, sadly.
Yeah, that's the same with me. So a lot of Sesame Street live growing up, Clifford live, and those kind of things. But at certain times we just couldn't afford it. Other times, just didn't get a chance to go to it. I saw Birthday Bash, which was their last tour that they did, in like 2012 or something like that, and it wasn't to the magnitude that they were doing shows before. It wasn't up to par with it. So I kind of forget that I even saw it. Even the kids I took, and I've said this many times on the podcast, the kids I took with me weren't even, when Barney came out, there was no like wow moment for them. It was just like it didn't faze them at all. I think that spoke true to where that franchise had gone, by being mismanaged so much, which was unfortunate. But yeah, I also wish I would have been able to see it live. That's something that I always love, the live videos, and so I just couldn't imagine what it would have been like to be there in a seat watching that unfold right before you.
Yeah, it's interesting because, firstly, to one of your points about not being as prominent to kids, I remember showing my cousin, who's now 14, many years ago. I remember introducing him to Barney. Didn't have the slightest interest. It's not really for me. But it's interesting with characters when you put them on stage. I remember I was chatting to a British television presenter who was at the helm of what was Playhouse Disney for the UK. And he was kind of at the forefront of that channel. He was promoting it. He was the presenter of it. And he was saying to me that he had never seen anything like what he'd seen when he was introducing these big characters to all these kids. He would do the Playhouse Disney live shows, and then he would bring Bear from the Big Blue House out onto the stage thinking, oh, these kids are not going to be interested in this bear. Thousands of people mobbed this bear in the space of 30 minutes because he was he was huge. So I could imagine the hype that Barney would have had during the live concerts. Yeah, but I never got to experience it. So
yeah, I told a story before on the podcast, I believe. I'm friends with a guy who runs a radio station here where I'm from, and back in the 90s, like right when Barney was really blowing up, 95, 96, they brought him here for an event, and he never got to meet any of the kids or families because every time they would try to bring him out of the room, he would get like mobbed by people. Surprised. And there was not enough security to keep people back and keep him safe. So they would put him back in the room, and then they would try it again and mob it. So they ended up just canceling the entire event. And there were obviously upset parents and upset kids, but they just couldn't safely bring him out. And that was just because of how massive of a character he was and how loved he was, that anytime they finally saw him, everyone wanted their kids, and all kids wanted to be right there. So that was a missed opportunity that we had here, where didn't even get a chance to actually interact because they couldn't get him out of the room in a safe way.
No, right.
Yeah, so it's something about, I used to do like Barney performances as a teenager, with a costume, and I did some other costume characters, and that's what I love so much. I used to just do it for free, and I love that so much because it's something, it's hard to explain the experience unless you see it firsthand of how kids just light up when they see these characters that they believe in. And that's where the magic is I never had that experience of having to being able to see a character that I really truly loved and adored in front of me and have that experience. And when kids get that, and the way they just light up and they just see just them in that character, it's such a cool thing to see. So yeah, I can imagine that guy with, Playhouse Disney Live
Mhm.
things, experiencing that as something, and or even Barney and those guys doing, Radio City and all those things. It just had to be a remarkable experience.
Yeah, yeah. The instant spontaneous reaction that you get from an audience and kids, really, you just, there's nothing like it. It's so magical to see, because children are sponges and they'll soak up really whatever they see. So,
Oh yeah,
and they just learn by copied behavior. So, I mean, to see Barney in actual life form, it
yeah,
must have been incredible. But
absolutely.
yeah, but sadly never got to see it. Not one bit
Yeah,
envious at all.
yeah. We'll have to see if this show is successful. If they put it on, on a tour
Yeah,
type thing, and it comes close. Now we're adults. We can just we can buy our own tickets,
yeah,
and it won't be
yeah.
the same. But hey,
Self-indulge, like you're the only adult here. I'm like, I know, but I don't care.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
Um, did you ever, obviously Barney was a preschool show.
yeah.
Did you ever have that moment, like some fans did, excuse me, where you grew out of the show for a while and then came back to it?
No, I was just a big kid growing up. The whole time I was probably watching programs that I shouldn't have been watching at a much older age. I remember going
Oh yeah.
into secondary school, um, um, or senior school as you call it, but
Uh-huh.
and my friends going, me talking about the Rugrats, because I love the Rugrats. It's one of my
Oh yeah.
all-time favorite shows. I'm obsessed with it even today. And my friends going to me, "Oh, you don't still watch that? I mean, that's a cartoon." And I give you a prime example. It's really interesting. Funny you mentioned. I remember being in the last year of primary school, sitting next to one of my friends. I must have been way old. I think I was about 10. Um, and I just remember sitting next to him and looking at him thinking, what do I talk about now? Oh, I know. So I turned to him and I said, did you watch Barney this morning? And he just looked at me in real disgust and said, no, Sean, I didn't watch Barney this morning. And then I sighed and thought, oh, now what do I talk about? I don't know what to talk about here. I was like, maybe I'm just a little bit too old to watch Barney now at 10 years of age, but I don't care.
Yeah, man.
Yeah.
I had the same um experience as far as watching this show. Like I told you, I
Uh-huh.
watched it till the end. And I said this before on the podcast. My grandma had
Yeah.
an in-home childcare center, and I lived there.
Uh-huh.
So I was the introduction to every new kid and generation of kids to Barney.
Yeah.
So Barney was just always around all the way to the end. And I used to imitate the show well into
Mhm.
high school. Like I would stand in front of the TV and just jump around and imitate everything that Barney or that Bob
Yeah,
or
same
Dean
here.
Wentz, whoever it was doing the voice and the moves. I just imitated it. And so that's one reason why I think I accept all the changes to Barney, Riff being added, and those things a little bit more than others, because I didn't have a moment where I left it when it was still the version that I knew and
Mhm.
came back to it and it was completely different. I watched it evolve over all those years. So
Yeah.
I have a different love for it, I think, than other fans do. Um, but yeah, it's interesting because I was still, in school, not willing to tell people that I was a Barney fan.
Hmm.
I would walk around. It was weird because like we would be talking about random things happening, and as many songs Barney has. There's a song for everything. So
Yeah.
anytime something would come up, I would sing a Barney song, and to my friends, they had no idea it was Barney. They just thought I was making songs up, just on the spot. Um, but that was my way to be able to keep my love of Barney like
Yeah.
alive in that moment without people really knowing.
Yeah.
Now, as an adult, I do my own children's show, and I work with people like Bob
Right.
Fulton on the show and things like that. Now I really get to embrace it in a way that I never had a chance to, which I
Yeah.
really, really enjoy. Um,
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, music is such a healing thing anyway, and I just think there was nothing really out there in kids television like there was with some of the songs they used in Barney and Friends in particular,
yeah,
because it almost felt grown up in a way, because they weren't looking down at kids and saying, well, now we're just going to sing Mary Had a Little Lamb.
right.
We're going to introduce kids to what essentially, I guess, is kind of kids pop music. I
Oh
mean,
yeah.
you know, looking at it as a kid, I always thought, well, these songs are really quite cool. And not that, it's the songs that my parents and my grandparents and my auntie and uncle could also resonate with and sing along to and know. I mean, my auntie would often ask me to sing some of the Barney songs to her, and I could sing them just
Oh
like that.
wow.
You know, I knew every, and it was really weird because there was no other program out there that was like that where I knew all of the songs. And even
Yeah.
today, like secretly, I still know some of the songs. You know,
Yeah.
but it's like with my partner when we're watching it with the little one. My partner's sitting there thinking secretly we're enjoying this much more than he is.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm listening to, you know, I say updated, but episodes that were past my time that I probably haven't seen as much of, thinking, oh, I remember this song. I mean, that was there when I was a kid. Yeah, it's evolved a bit, it's changed slightly, but you know,
Yeah.
it's quite nice to have that nostalgic element to it.
Yeah, and you're so right with the music aspect of Barney too. It just every person who touched the music on Barney made it in a way that it was timeless. Like your list,
Yeah,
like you said, you watch it with your kid, and it's
yeah,
episodes that are well past your time. But if you think about it, you know, 2007, 8, whatever time that
yeah,
was that was still so long ago. Or if you
yeah.
watch seasons 2 or 3, that music still feels like it's right in the same place today as it was then. It doesn't
Uh-huh.
feel outdated. It doesn't sound outdated. And just the way the
Yeah.
music was written and created was just amazing. So like, don't I know all the lyrics to every song, and I sing it with my daughter. I sing it by myself sometimes.
Yeah.
So I'm right there with you. Um,
Yeah.
it sounded like when I was saying I used to imitate the show, you said you used to do the same thing.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it was, well, literally, I mean, I have a bunch of videotapes that back in the day when you had the old camera recorder, my auntie would
Yeah,
just film life. You know, it was before YouTube where you
yeah.
could just make your own documentary, you know, and she would film everything and I'd be just there on the bed bouncing up and down and just singing along to all the songs and you
Man.
know, walking around the playground just acting out scenes from the show.
Oh
Um,
man.
very weirdly to everybody looking around saying, "Can you not find a friend?" I'm like, "I have one secretly, but he's not here." um,
Yeah,
you know, it's one of those things. But no, it's, I mean, as a child, I guess it was also a comfort for me because he was a safe character. It
yes.
kind of became a bit, I guess, looking back, that the way the character was made was very sort of, oh, well, I love you and nothing else kind of matters.
Mhm.
And that's fine. But I think in 2024, we kind of have to understand that not everything is as happy as Barney makes it out to be, as much as we'd like it. You know, the
Mhm.
world we live in is not, you know, perfect. But and I do kind of feel that, you know, I wish there were times when, you know, the character stopped and thought about various morals and, you know, and that sort of stuff. But you know, and realize that there are consequences in some respects. But
Yeah.
as a kid, it was just a lovely, safe thing to watch. Um, but yeah, but that's just me being cynical and thinking, you know, maybe there were times where, you know, there could have been more lessons in, you know,
Mhm.
well, this is, you know, not a nice thing, you know, to do or a nice thing to have had happen to you. Um, you know, I think they could have explored more avenues of things like grief and loss, you know, losing a pet and that sort of stuff, and
Yeah.
you know, things that kids grow up with, um, rather than the happy-go-lucky, oh, we're just going to sing, you know, every time, you know, we're
Mhm.
happy. Which as a child, it's lovely, but watching it back now, it just made me ponder and think, well, yeah, maybe if it does come back, maybe we can see more of, okay, well, let's explore more different aspects of children's emotions now.
Yeah. You know what? I think you think that way because there's other people who said the same thing.
Right.
Because we're adults now looking at this show that we
Uh-huh.
grew up with, we're thinking of it in the way that our parents probably thought about it back then.
Yeah.
Um, but you know, that's also they were very intentional to not do those things because they were only focusing on those very, very, very young kids who don't necessarily understand or grasp
Right.
the concepts to them. And the thing is that I think it worked so well because they did it the right way.
Yeah.
Because as we look back, we all were enthralled in the show. We were acting it out when we weren't even watching the show, or we were
Yeah.
acting it out along with the show, and we were just happy. And you said, like you said, it was a safe place for us as children, and I
Yeah.
think that's what they wanted to create. There's
Yeah.
so many
Absolutely.
shows that touch on those other things or expose you to the negativity that I think for 30 minutes of just love could change the way a person
Yeah.
feels. And I understand it because I think as adults now we do look back at certain things like that where we go, well, they really could have dug
Hmm.
deeper into here. But when you're looking at it through the eyes of who you were as a kid and kids today, if they introduced that, they started to do that in the later seasons, and that's what started to make the show deteriorate because it was leaving from what Barney was and trying to
Right.
dive into those kind of things that as a young 3-year-old or 2-year-old, you don't even begin to understand that concept in a way that it would make
Yeah.
sense, you know? Um,
Yeah, I get that.
so it's
I mean,
interesting.
I do get your point, and I think also the reason why they changed it kind of in later series because when you've got a lot of pressure on you to, as I said, evolve, and I think that's why there was quite a bit of backlash
Yeah,
in various aspects of the character. They're
yeah,
just trying to please everybody, and I just don't think you can do that. But I do think as adults, yeah, we do kind of look into things a lot more. As kids, we are just innocent and we'll just watch whatever is in front of us. So, and it didn't do us any harm. I mean, I did, in all honesty, I learned a lot from, Barney. I'm not saying that I didn't,
yeah.
and there are a lot of, emotional aspects. You learn about family. And, I think that was important because it was very family orientated. It was something
Mhm.
that was very cleverly written in that the adults can get just as much enjoyment out of it, watching it because there's nothing worse than having to drag your parent in, to watch a program that they're just
Oh
sitting
yeah.
there thinking, I can't do this.
Uh-huh.
So I always remember my auntie and my mum getting as much enjoyment out of watching it as
That's awesome.
I did, and actually prompting me to continue to watch it because
Yeah.
they trusted it.
That's awesome. Yeah, I had my grandma as a kid, she would also walk around with, a video camera, and
Yeah.
she would film me and my Barney Halloween costume standing in front of the TV imitating the show and the voice and things. So I have a video of that somewhere. I need to uncover it again of just me as a probably 6 or 7 year old, just
Yeah.
literally in that moment in real time of what it was like for me as a child. Um, and it's one of those cool things to just look back and watch because now, like I said, I do my own show and
Yeah.
it's very music, it's very music filled like Barney was. And we, like you mentioned with music, we try to make sure that, or we do make sure that we touch all different types of genres of music just because it does speak to you and you get
Yeah.
exposed to new things and it's just fun. And so it's cool that we kind of had that same experience too of, our adults who loved us, just filming family life on a regular day
Yeah.
and being able to watch back and look at that kind of thing. Um,
Absolutely. And a
something,
lot of the songs growing up for me had a very profound impact on me. And I can't put a finger on why, but I mean, a lot of the more slower songs
Mhm.
kind of maybe it shaped who I am as a performer today because I sing as well.
Nice.
But it was interesting because a lot of the songs really affected me in a way as a kid that I'd never heard music like it. I
Mhm.
mean, as I said, more so the slower songs. I mean, there was one song in particular that I don't know why. Every time I listened to it, it was like I got a bit shaken up, and I don't know why that was. But it was, I think it was the I'm your sister, you're my brother, because I didn't at the time have a brother or a sister. I do now, but at the time I was an only child, so I
Mhm.
didn't really know what it was like to have a sibling.
Yeah.
So it was almost like, I wish I had a brother or a sister who was older or younger than me, you know.
Yeah.
So it kind of had an effect on me that, you know, I thought, well, I don't really resonate with that song, and I don't really want to hear it because it makes me sad that I don't have a brother or sister.
Yeah.
So it's the power of music is incredible, how it can affect you in those ways.
Oh, for sure. For sure.
Mm.
I want to talk back on something else real fast, completely unrelated to Barney, but you mentioned
Right.
it, and I think it was great for what we were talking about with the new iteration of Barney. You mentioned being obsessed with Rugrats, and
Yeah.
there's obviously the new version of Rugrats where there's CGI, but to me, they kind of stayed almost very true to what the original Rugrats were and those
Mhm.
characters. Have you seen the new version? Do you like the new version as much, or kind of on the same level as you enjoyed the classic stuff with that show?
Yeah, I've seen bits and pieces of the
Mhm.
new Rugrats. I think it's wonderful. I love it. In terms of, you know, when I was watching the opening title sequence and that music is so iconic, I
Oh
was
yeah,
like, and that's another program that has never really gone away, and it's kind of surpassed
yeah,
SpongeBob in some ways, but it's almost, for me, you know, it's like, well, you're either a SpongeBob fan or you're a Rugrats fan. And
mhm,
SpongeBob has always kind of had that higher level to the Rugrats. Like, you walk into any shop over here and you'll get SpongeBob merchandise. The Rugrats is quite hard to come across.
yeah.
But I I couldn't get I don't like how people think they can just rewrite history.
Oh yeah.
And one of the things that really shocked me is that, well, okay, are you going to do a continuation of the Rugrats,
Hmm.
or are you completely going to scrap everything that's happened, um, and just rewrite a bunch of episodes that don't really make sense? Not only that, you're not. It felt really weird because I was watching an episode that I thought, I've seen this episode 25 years ago, but they've
Yeah.
kind of remade it. And then I was like, but then I'm watching another episode where the characters are, I mean, they've been written very differently. And I'm thinking, well, how can you make a character like Susie, who was once older, how can you change her to become a younger character?
Uh-huh.
And then when I was watching the introduction of, I think it was Kimmy, I was thinking, well, what's the point of Rugrats in Paris if you're not going to, you know, give her a nod to, you know, what the character was? It just feels very, very strange.
Hmm.
But then, as we said before, you know, we're not the ones that are going to be really interested in it in a way.
Yeah,
So kids nowadays won't know much difference, but
for sure.
it just felt very weird and didn't quite. I mean, I thought it was, you know, the animation was great, but it was just the rewriting the history part for me that didn't
Yeah.
quite click. If
I
you're
have,
going to do something, then you've got to do it as a kind of continuation and not kind of change it so much that it just doesn't make sense.
I agree. There's one episode of that show that really where it really hit home, where it was like, okay, yeah, it's the Rugrats, but it's obviously a very different Rugrats than we
Yeah.
knew. Was the one episode, I don't know if you ever saw it. It's when I don't know if it was Angelica or if it was one of the kids, but they were setting up their grandpa on dates through like a dating app,
Right.
and I was like, for a children's show, it's like why would that be a story or topic line
Hmm.
ever, you know? Like that's when it really hit home, like, okay, yeah, we're in a different time now. It's
Yeah,
obviously a different show. It's not the same show. I,
absolutely.
I don't watch it as much as I watch the classic ones, because I mean, we did grow up in a like you said, everyone thinks their generation was the best, but we did grow up in a time where television was taking off in a way that
Yeah.
had never been seen before and can't be replicated since. And we had some great shows, like the Rugrats and other shows that, um, I much prefer just watching the original stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a very heightened. I mean, in kids' TV, everything has to be a heightened reality anyway.
Yeah.
But I think there was lead way with certain directors of that show to be a bit more cohesive, because you've got such a vast, diverse team of directors. There's going to be at some point, what's the word I'm looking for? You're going to have contradictions.
Oh yeah.
So, you're going to look at one episode and think, well, maybe they wouldn't act in that way.
Sure.
But it's the way that the director sees himself as a kid.
Mm-hmm.
So, it got to the point where I've watched several episodes as an adult of the original series, and just reevaluated the episodes and looked into them far too much than I should do, and thought, well, this character is being a bit more brazen in this episode than what he would have been, maybe in another episode. But they were very good to kind of keep the characters on one level, I guess,
Sure.
and to keep them the same. But and I guess also it comes down to kids' emotions are different all the time. There'll be one day where a kid is, frustrated or probably in a bit of a mood, and another day they'll be very willing to kind of say, hey, let's do whatever you want to do. So it just, that series in particular, just, I think the directing of it could have been slightly better, in my opinion, in some episodes than others. But you're going to get that with a huge team of directors. You're bound to.
Absolutely. Well, man, on this podcast, for each guest, we always ask them to bring a Barney item or a couple items, depending on the what they have that just means the most to them. Can you tell us what you have for people who's not watching video? Just kind of also explain what you have and the story behind why that item is the item you chose today.
Oh, right. Well, I mean, I wish I was here 25 years ago, because I would have everything. I mean, I remember distinctly, because as a kid, I've still got, back at my mum's house, cupboardfuls of videotapes, and I kid you not, I probably have about 50 odd Rugrat videotapes from end to end, plus all the DVDs and everything. And it got to a point probably about 15 years ago where it's interesting. You said about, did you have a time where you phased out and came back? I thought, oh, I'm too old to have all these videotapes now. I'm just going to get rid of them, stupidly, thinking they're probably going to be worth a lot of stuff, a lot of money. But my auntie had a load of Barney videotapes. I mean, we had every single Barney videotape imaginable over here, which were all, I think most of them were on polygram video. And I remember distinctly the day that she took me into her spare bedroom, and she said, would it be okay if we got rid of all the videos now for Barney, because you are, you're growing out of them? And I'm just sitting there thinking my heart's going to sink now. But I can't say, so she just got rid of them all, not realizing that it probably would have been worth a lot of money nowadays. So I only ever have a couple of Barney ones that I've picked up from second-hand stores, or charity shops that we call over here, or boot fairs. So yeah, it was just, 20 odd years ago, yes, I would be watching Barney in concert or Barney's Fun and Games, 10 times over, and loving it. But at the moment, what I do have, and I think in the background you can see Bob West there. It says just imagine. I have this little Barney doll. I don't know what year he's from, but I acquired him very, very recently, and it was really strange because I was picking my my little one up from nursery. And he literally goes to nursery across where I live, and we went to a little secondhand shop, and it was on the very day that I was going to do a podcast with Corey Durham. And I walked into the charity shop, and I saw him for £1. So one English pound. And I thought, I'm just going to pick him up because he's probably the only thing I've got. So I picked him up, and he's been my sort of good luck charm. And, he was there when I did Corey's interview. So he came at the right time. I did have this particular model when I was growing up as a kid, and I think there was one where you could push his stomach and he would talk. So yeah, but his teeth have become a bit yellow, like British people. So he's actually, you know, fitting in very well here. So yeah, I gave him a good wash. He's all good. So yeah, that's a little Barney doll that I picked up. And also, I was in a town called Somerset, and I managed to find a Barney DVD, which I'd never seen before. And it appealed to me because it has Good Day, Good Night, and I had that on videotape, and I thought, I've never seen that released on DVD before. And some person was messaging me under the Barney History Fans Facebook saying, "Oh, I live in Somerset. How comes I never saw that?" So that's nice, but I couldn't tell you where this release was, but it's just got 2 blank discs. And it's got 4. I think it's got 4 video releases on 2 discs. So that was nice. I haven't been able to watch it yet because I need to get a DVD player. So, but that was nice. So yeah, other than that, yeah, I haven't been able. I'm slowly going to collect more stuff. I haven't got, you know, as big a collection as you do there, but yeah, I did as a kid. But I mean, I had everything imaginable as a kid.
Yeah,
Barney towels, Barney plush toys.
Yep.
You know, he was just there. And I think merchandise has kind of fizzled out again, you know, over here for Barney, unless you kind of look on eBay.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I mean, I'd love to see them produce Barney in a pop. That would be awesome.
Oh yeah, no, you know what? That is something that I could see Mattel doing. You know, they especially when they're trying to lean into the adult nostalgia, teaming with Crocs and these other things.
Yeah.
Pop or Funko Barney would be crazy to have. That would absolutely be something that needs to. Mattel, if you hear this, because they watch, I've heard that they watch the show sometimes. Create a Pop Barney and give Sean the credit.
Yeah, I'm Dragon's Den. I'm not taking anything. You know, if you're multimillionaires, don't come to me. Yeah, no. Yeah, maybe that is the way. Maybe that nostalgia thing is maybe where Barney should be. I think he appeals to a lot of older people, really. So yeah, maybe it is that nostalgia thing you need. But yeah, I don't know.
Those are some cool items to have, man. I've never seen that DVD before. And it looks like I saw one title in there, Splish Splash. If it's the one I'm thinking of, that's a season 7 episode. So it's strange that it's a season 7 episode on there with some classic era home videos. But that's a cool find to have, man.
Yeah, it says 2 discs, 4 episode pack, but I don't know where it's from. So
yeah, so weird. But hey, that's really cool to have. And you know, finding that doll when you found it is amazing. Those are some great items.
And I didn't pay a single penny for this. When I took it to the shop counter, it was in like a store where they sell DVDs and games consoles and that sort of stuff. And they tried to scan the barcode, they couldn't do it. So they just said, "Oh, you can have this." I was like, "Okay."
Oh wow!
Oh, Barney's with me. He's looking after me.
There's the Barney magic right there.
Yeah, exactly. I was like, I probably won't be able to play it because it's probably the wrong region, but I will see what I can do.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. Those are some great items. Before we wrap up here today, you do. I want to touch on this real fast, just so people know. You do your own podcast that you mentioned. Can you just explain what's your podcast about? How can people find it? And that way they can support you.
Oh, well, that's very nice of you to ask me that. Actually, I think what I do is quite cool. I chat to kids' TV stars from back in my childhood. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to chat to Bob West yet, if you're listening. I mean, he did come to me and he was like, if it fits the Barney brand, then we can do it. But he wants, you know, people like that want to know if I'm getting significant views and that sort of stuff. So that's fine.
Oh, sure.
But yeah, I chat to kids' TV stars from my childhood. So I've spoke to all sorts of people, presenters, actors, puppeteers, because people actually find it interesting knowing what these people are doing now, really. So yeah, it's a running thing for me, kids television. You know, if I'm not talking to someone about kids TV. I'm being interviewed about kids TV, so
Yeah.
it doesn't seem to leave me. But yeah, I love it, and I think it's brilliant what you do as well, keeping the magic of children's TV alive as well. For our generation, I think that's great, and it's been great having an opportunity to sit and talk to you as well. It's nice to be on the other end because usually I'm the one conducting the conversation. So it's been nice to be invited on someone else's channel.
For sure.
So I've enjoyed it.
Yeah, man. And what's the name of your podcast? How can people find it?
The name of it's Be My Guest, Blasts from the Past in a Podcast. So it's quite a mouthful.
That's awesome, though.
Yeah, and I'm always having new people. I mean, I had Corey Durham on there recently. It was a very late podcast because obviously, like, he was in America. But so that was nice. And I did it at 10 o'clock my time, and we didn't finish till about 1 a.m. And he was learning Cockney rhyming slang, which is like a London thing. He was trying to figure out if he could make it as a Londoner because he does a lot of impressions as well. So that was really good and a nice moment for me as well. And as I said, I couldn't tell the difference between him and Bob, to be fair. Although talking about voices, I know I think Dean was the voice after Bob. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it just come into my head that I was watching something where they were talking about how he tried in the end to kind of make Barney his own. And, Barney was had just as longevity, when Dean was involved as Bob was. But hand on my heart, I can say Bob was my Barney, and always will be. He was my Barney, Bob was always my Barney. So I can't say any more than that, really.
Yeah, no. And I think that's what, I don't know how to work. That's how we all are. We all have the one that we prefer the most. And it's normally cut down to just because it's just what we lived with as children. You know what I'm saying? There's some people that I know who are Barney fans, and to them, they say Dean Wint is my Barney because all they knew growing up and all that was on TV and videos coming out were Dean Wint's version of Barney. And Dean Wint was Barney longer than Bob West was. Bob created it. But Bob created it and made the character who it was. But Dean Wint and even Carrie Stinson, who was in the suit during the park stuff, they were Barney longer than David Joyner and Bob West's time with Barney was. So they touched a little bit more of a generation than Bob and those guys did. But Bob and those guys did it in the 90s when Barney was this massive character that was unmatchable at that time. People talk about Corey. Corey had the opportunity to do that one Mattel video, and people, there's fans who love his iteration and love what he did. They love Bob or they love Dean, and there were also people in between. There was Tim Dever and Duncan Brandon who took over after Bob before Dean Wint came in for those later like schoolyard treehouse videos. So everyone has their own thing, and I think it usually sticks to what was I exposed to the most, or what did I identify with the most during my childhood. And if you grew up with Bob's version of Barney the most as a kid, that's who your Barney is always going to be to you, because that's the character that you grew to love with. What I do love about Dean is his voice was vastly different. But in the beginning, he was trying to imitate Bob a little bit, you can hear, and then you can hear that he was trying to figure out something different. But what I do like by the end is that he did what I think any voice actor should do, whether you're voicing a well-known character or you're voicing a new character, is you find what works for you and you make it your own. And Barney was still true to the core of who he always was. He was still happy and bouncy, and he loved the kids. The voice just sounded different. And I think if you can at least just keep who he was as a character now to the core the same, then hey, it might not fit for me, but if there's a kid out there who it did work for, that's all that matters. And so everyone, there's people love Bob, and so there's a lot of people who agree with you that Bob West is Barney. I mean, you think about it, when the documentary was coming out, this new iteration was announced, everyone wanted to talk to Bob because Bob is the most notable one that people remember when they think of Barney. They think of the '90s, and that's just what it's always going to be. It's never going to change from that. And I don't think there's anything wrong with having the version that you just love the most.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Well, I've learned something new because I didn't know that Dean surpassed Bob as the voice actor, so that's interesting.
Oh yeah, he joined. I think they hired him in 2000 or 2001.
Right. Okay.
And he was still technically the voice up till 2017, I think, doing like some small videos or voicing things, something like that. So he did it for about 15, 16 years. Whereas Bob, he left right after season 6, so he was there for 10 years, I think.
Right.
It doesn't take away from the work that either one of them gave to it,
No.
I'm so grateful for, and I say it all the time on here, so grateful for them as voice actors, the people who were in the bodies of all the costumes, the kids, anyone who was involved with that show to give us this experience that we get to have to then sit here and talk to each other across the country about our love for it. All of them truly have my respect every day just because of the love and time they gave to it.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's great that he can pass the baton as well.
Yeah, for sure.
But as we've been chatting, I've just been thinking about the Barney kids in particular, and thinking that there was no other show where I knew all of the characters as well as I did know the Barney kids, and I remember there was a kid who had the same name as me, Sean, and being so irritated at the fact that he spelt his name different to the way it's spelled. I was like, well, but that's not how you spell my name. And I was like, but I always wanted to be a Barney kid growing up. I was like, this must be the best thing ever to just be a Barney kid. And I always wonder as adults now how the kids reacted, knowing that they're actually talking to somebody in a costume.
That's one of the questions I want to, if I ever get a chance to talk to any of them, I want to ask them that kind of thing, because I know one thing they tried to do, if I remember right, is they tried to keep the image alive as long as possible. Like, the kids didn't get to see David or Carrie, whoever it was, getting into the costume or getting out of the costume. They just always just saw Barney and Barney. They see the other guys obviously for rehearsals, but they never saw the transition, and they kept it that way, I believe, all the way through. They get dressed somewhere else and then come in, and that's just Barney. I think they obviously knew that there was a different, that it obviously was a person because they had to rehearse with them. But I want to ask those kind of questions too. Just what was that experience like?
Yeah, it's just interesting to know, isn't it?
Yeah, for sure.
Because I know that, I was always thinking one of the downfalls is that, those kids are probably slightly older than the demographic for Barney. But thinking, well, he is a character, but, what must it be like, knowing that you are producing a TV show? Because for me, I don't look at it like that as a kid. I'm like, well, Barney's real, that's what he is. But actually working on the production as a kid, knowing that, it's not all that it seems to be. But
I wonder
I love the Barney kids. They were great.
Yeah, and I wonder if it's the thing, like, too, like much like Sesame Street or those things, when you see a Muppet and you're talking to them, you slowly forget about that puppeteer that's right below the whatever it is, and you're just there with that puppet. And I wonder if that's the same with Barney. It's a different, it's a voice coming from somewhere else and this kind of thing. But if you saw them in person, all of a sudden you just see them as the character, not about the elements that make that character come to life. I'm wondering if that's something that happened with the kids where, they knew it was a costume, but when it's time to film and interact, they just saw Barney or just saw BJ and Baby Bop or just saw Scooter and Miss Etta, and it was just those characters in that moment. It's interesting too that you said like you knew all the kids from the show, because Barney
Yeah.
always had an ever evolving group of kids, and
Yeah.
knowing each of those characters' names and what they look like and that kind of thing,
I was
just from
obsessed with
other
all of them.
shows. Yeah.
I was obsessed with all of them. I mean, literally, from even the backyard era right up
Oh
until
yeah.
I mean, I couldn't tell you the characters sort of in the playground era,
Hmm.
apart from the fact I know that Selena Gomez was in it.
Yeah.
But and Demi Lovato. But other than that, I couldn't really tell you those characters. But up until the Treehouse era, yeah, there were lots of characters that I really remember and really resonated with,
For sure.
because they were all different, and you know, I think they accepted people who were, you know, of all different abilities. You know, it was nice to be represented on a show as well. So it was nice to see
Yes.
somebody wearing glasses, you know,
Yes.
because I had what we had over here, we called them national health glasses because they were free. So it was nice to watch somebody wearing big round glasses like I had, thinking, well,
Yeah.
that's quite cool, which it wasn't. So that was nice, you know, to kind of have a representation. I think it did very well with that.
Yeah.
You know, because you had people that, you know, were from all different walks of life, from all different backgrounds. So I
For
think
sure.
they did very well with that, not to kind of keep it one kind of playing field. So that was good.
Absolutely. 100% agree, man.
Yeah,
Well, we're
that
here
was.
at the we're here at the end of the podcast, man. Thank you so much for
Oh no,
reaching out and deciding to come on and do
no,
this
I
with me.
loved it.
Yeah.
It's great, and it's nice to be able to talk about Barney, and you know,
Yeah.
hopefully, you know, the character will have another 30 years, you know,
Oh yeah.
another longevity in whatever form that he comes in.
For sure. The last question
I
that we
hope they
always
bring the kids back as well. I don't know how they're going to do that in the animated series, but
well, from what they said with the synopsis initially is that it's Barney, BJ, and Baby Bob. BJ's name is changed to Billy now, and
yeah,
there's three kid characters. So they'll probably just be the same three characters all the time, like any cartoon show does, that they
right.
run around with. So we'll see. Hopefully we'll start seeing new things because if it's airing in the fall, they should probably get to doing some type of promotion for it. So we'll see what happens.
Well, let's
Uh,
hope it makes it over here as well then, because you know we
yeah.
don't know what's going to happen. But Billy doesn't have the same kind of resonating name as BJ does, but he'll always
No, it
be
doesn't.
BJ to me.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Before we end, the last question I always
Yeah.
ask everybody, and it's just your own personal way that you interpret it, is
Okay.
why Barney?
Why Barney? Ooh, that's a broad question. Why Barney? Um, why as in why do I love the character?
Yeah, it's however you interpret it. So yeah, what drew you to the character? Why
Oh
is
right.
Barney needed today? Why do you think that character has been so important? However you interpret the question is however you feel free you would like to answer it.
Okay. Why Barney? Probably because growing up in the 90s, he was always there.
Mhm.
It was hard not to kind of, it was hard not to notice him. There was nobody out there like him on kids' television. I mean, he was one of a kind, I think always has been. The production side of things looked incredible. It was almost of an era where people took time to invest in kids' TV.
Yeah.
And I liked the way that it looked visually. Didn't always get some of the American isms or the terminology. Like,
Hmm.
you know, I always used to say to my auntie, what is pumpernickel bread? We haven't got a clue what
Oh
that
yeah.
is. Because we never had that over here. So it was like there were lots of Americanisms. But I think why Barney? Because he was kind of a healer for somebody who was, you know, quite lonely. And I have battled depression for quite a number of years. But
Mhm.
but as a kid, you know, he was just there. He was a comfort, as I said. He was there whenever I needed him on a video cassette. I could watch him over and over again, much to people's annoyance because they would have heard this song over and over again. You are special. I'm like, you don't need to hear that 20 times. So, yeah. And I remember I had a little game you put into the computer that I would play over and over again. I would just hide myself away and just constantly play it. So it kind of became quite an unhealthy obsession in the end. But I only have him to blame for that. So yeah. But also I think there's very few people that would say the same thing, that Barney was always there. I mean, I say to my partner when I do my podcast series, I ask her, out of all these people, how many of these do you know? And she's like, I don't remember watching any of them, but what she does remember is Barney. So we have that kind of connection now. I'm not sort of sitting there thinking you haven't got a clue who I've spoken to here. It's quite nice that she's able to connect. And she sings along to all of the Barney songs too. And I just remember singing the I Love You song over and over again with my auntie. It's just an easy song to pick up. And it's probably one of the first songs that I ever learned as a kid.
For sure.
Yeah.
Nice, man. I love that. That's a great answer. Again, I really, really appreciate your time here today.
Thanks.
Taking the moment to talk with us. It's always fun to hear other people's experiences and hear where we have things in common or have things that are different. So a lot of great fun. Thank you again for joining me today.
It's been great fun, bro. I've loved it.
Absolutely. Well, for Barney history fans, look up Sean's podcast when you have the time. Support him and do all those great things. But otherwise, I hope you guys enjoyed this episode of the podcast. And who knows, maybe next time we'll see you in your spot of love. Take care, everybody.